Hello, I'm Mark Baer. I'm your host of the YourTown television program. My first guest today, Carol Lynn McKibben, PhD. I love that. Hello. So you're a former host and you're coming back as a host.
I am.
And let's get right down to business. What's your new book?
My new book is going to be called Agropolis. And it's a comprehensive history of Salinas, beginning in the post-World War II era and coming up to the present day. So when I was a host for you before, I was working on a book on Seaside, which I published in 2012 called Racial Beachhead, Diversity and Democracy in a Military Town.
Just real quickly before we move ahead, just a quick little background for the...
Okay. All right. Well, you have my name. I have a PhD in history from the University of California at Berkeley, and I've been teaching for the last 10 years at Stanford University in the history department. I teach courses on California history and urban history, and that is what brought me to Salinas. I'm really interested in how the story of Salinas fits into new understandings in the field of urban history, particularly in California history.
So the Salinas History Project.
The Salinas History Project.
What's the genesis, and let's give me the big strokes.
Okay, well, Salinas is a really fascinating place because unlike a lot of rural America, it's thriving. But instead of that story, we often hear the story of crime and violence. There's a lot of material on Salinas that's already been written, most of it very focused on a group or an epoch or a person. So for example, John Steinbeck, Chinatown, all of these places have been kind of looked at, parts of the city, but there hasn't been much of an effort to pull it all together. So we have lots of bits and pieces, but no comprehensive understanding. And so the goal of this project is to pull all the pieces together for a more comprehensive view of the city and to give Salinas pride of place in the field of urban American historical scholarship, which it richly deserves because it is a success story.
So what's the difference between, let's call it community-based research and more traditional academic research?
Okay, so I have a foot in both worlds. I've been teaching at Stanford University for 10 years, so I teach courses that are broadly based, and research is focused on campus in libraries, and most scholars operate that way. That's what we do. We work in the library, we use archives, archival collections, and bits and pieces of oral histories to sort of fill out our work. But a community-based research project is really about engaging the community under study to participate actively in constructing the narrative. So in Seaside, I put all drafts of every chapter on the city clerk's desk to share with the community, and they had an opportunity to critique it if they wished. The community was involved every step of the way. This is not to say that a project like this is only about community history. It's not only based on oral history, which is really, it has its serious limitations. So it needs to be balanced with a real academic effort. And that is something that I'm undertaking right now. So I'm looking at census data, I'm looking at court documents, I'm looking at a breadth of material on Salinas that will fill out the picture that various oral histories have presented on a given agricultural family or a specific area of Salinas. So a lot has been done in terms of oral history at CSUMB, for example, under the direction of Professor Rina Ben-Mayor on Chinatown and people who remembered Chinatown. But that needs to fit into a larger story of what happened to Salinas as a whole and how that changed over the years. And that's what I'm really interested in engaging with.
How do you deal now? Let's talk about some of the roles of your institutional partners, for example, Hartnell, CSUMB,
Right, Stanford.
Stanford. How does
this
that work
is
together?
all a collaboration.
Okay.
I really believe in collaboration. So there are people who are experts in various parts of the field of urban history, urban California, and this region who know a lot, who've written a lot, who have done some research, and they should be part of the project too. So I'm in the process of making those connections to the local academic institutions, but also Stanford has been a great partner. So it's a partnership. It's a partnership with the community. It's a partnership with the academic institutions that are engaged in the community. And in a larger setting, it's a partnership with urban scholars as a whole.
Okay, now let's talk about the population at large. So how do residents get involved? How do they find you? How do they participate? Because they have the history. So
Exactly.
What's the process from them to you?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. They do have their own version of their history of Salinas. So I will begin a quarterly event schedule that will allow residents to join in and give me an opportunity to be introduced to people who are interested in participating in the project. The first event is scheduled for Sunday afternoon, April 30th, from 1:30 to 3:30 in the city rotunda. And I will talk a little bit about my work. I'm going to bring in Lori Flores, who wrote a book on the Mexican-American community in Salinas. The head of urban studies, the director of urban studies at Stanford will give a little talk, and hopefully some scholars from CSUMB will join in. So there will be opportunities for civic engagement throughout the process. And it's envisioned as a 3-year process. So we'll do this 3 or 4 times a year so that community members can just show up and offer insights, give me their contact information so that I can introduce them maybe on this program.
Okay. Now, I'm just scaling this out in my head. This is a big project.
Yes.
How do you go about funding something like this?
It is a big project, and it's easier to fund than you might think. And it comes from a variety of sources, starting with the city, which does a lot in kind. So the city provides office space, the city provides space to host these events, some staffing, a little bit of staffing, but it's a collaboration. Stanford is doing that too. CSUMB is also helping. And the community at large participates. So with that as a jump start, we apply for local grants and grants at the federal and state level that fund research in the humanities. So it's a really it's a collective effort, and it proceeds sort of in a stair-step way over time. But it's got to be a community investment. Communities need to have their histories told, and they need to fund them too. They need to say, well, this is as important to us as streets and lighting. We need to know who we are. We need our identity so that we can make policy proposals moving forward that help us. If we don't know where we came from, then we can't possibly chart a path forward.
So a couple things, and you can answer this any way you choose, but why history matters, and as you go into these projects, your experience at this now, how do you see your preconceptions changing? I try not to have any preconceptions because they always change.
Yeah. This is my 3rd community-based research project. My first book was on the Sicilian migration to Monterey. The second, of course, was the Seaside book, and this is now the 3rd. And I always try to walk in with an idea in my mind's eye that I'm just open, that I want to hear all voices. And the first parts that I hear about Salinas or anywhere usually come from the print media. So that I want to immediately look at that and think about it. And at this point, the print media and even the news media, the regular media on television, focuses, for the most part in Salinas, on crime and violence. That's a big story. But there's more to it than that. It's a complex place, and a lot of its successes are overlooked in favor of that narrative. So the narrative that focuses only on the underclass or only on poverty is problematic. The narrative that focuses only on crime and violence is narrow and problematic. And the narrative that only focuses on the successes of the ag tech industry are problematic. When you pull it all together, it begins to make sense. And then when you pull it all together, you can see the policies that failed in the past and policies that might work better in the past. So for example, when we look at something like crime and violence, which is a really important issue in Salinas, we might think about community policing, which is something that comes up over and over again, but is not front page news. So let's see what we can do with our knowledge of the past to move forward with policies in the present and future that can work effectively for this lovely city.
And I mean, Salinas is intriguing. I mean, it is ag. It's close to Silicon Valley. It is technology.
Right.
It's on the front lines of people coming here and becoming new, creating the American dream. It's got vibrancy. It's California. It's beautiful. It's kind of old California. It's got history. It's got educational institutions, and I think what history can do is create pride. And
pride of place.
And pride of place has to be important. It has to matter.
Beyond that, Salinas needs to know its significance regionally, in terms of the state, in terms of the nation. So it's not just local pride of place. And there have been a number of local histories that tried to do that.
Yes.
But I think that Salinas can have genuine pride of place if the history of its significance in the region is known a little bit more, appreciated a little bit more, and we really understand how it fits into the history of California and the future of California. And as you suggested, regionally, and it's a big regional study, Salinas is just as connected to Silicon Valley as it is to the Monterey Peninsula.
Exactly.
So we need to understand those connections and explain them in a way that everyone can hear and understand and appreciate genuinely, not just in a kind of a booster way, which is what we often see in small city endeavors to create pride of place. Well, it's just rah-rah. We want to go beyond that and look at Salinas, really its significance, how it's emerged into the 21st century.
And then, there are fault lines. There were water issues. There's our immigration issues.
Absolutely.
And understanding the
right.
And those are the conflicts of the past continue as conflicts into the present and future. So having clarity on what's
right.
It's not because these are bad people and these are bad people. There's conflicts. Based on real things, and that has to be understood.
Yes, and I would use the word complexity.
Okay, very good.
So I would say that the complex story is always more interesting than the simple story. And all of those fault lines, as you said, in terms of the relations between residents of Salinas, among residents of Salinas, need to be laid out and carefully explored and explained. And that's what I aim to do. I want to see how they all fit together and not just focus on one group or look only at conflict. Let's look at how people collaborate too, and why Salinas is such an important immigrant destination And will it remain so? Will innovations in technology encourage immigration, continue to keep a working class in Salinas, or is that going to be eliminated? We've seen that happen in manufacturing cities throughout the country. The working class can't find work, as manufacturing jobs are not just, they're not sent away as much as their robots are sort of replacing them. So we need to understand where technology in agriculture is going and how that affects cities as well. And I can't think of a better place to look than Salinas.
Now, just as we wind down a little bit, let's talk about surprise, because I'm sure you are always surprised by what you find. And, and kind of, what's the underpinning motivation, joy that you get out of your work of this?
I love it when people come to me and say how important history is to them. We tend to think that the humanities have been replaced now and that nobody's really interested in history, that it's old stuff, it's not modern, it's not, but I'm always surprised with the reception that I get from communities because I'm interested in their history. And I represent this academic world. The academic world is interested in Seaside, in Monterey, in Salinas. It means something. So, but I always feel, coming from an academic world, that is something of a bubble, that, oh no, nobody's going to want this done. They're going to be worried about what is exposed or expressed. And that is really not the case. People are very open and they really want their history to be known. It's important to them. So I think that that's something that continues to surprise. It surprises me, but it excites me and it keeps me going. It's part of the passion. I want to really do justice to the precious stories that I'm told, to the precious history that I'm witnessing. I remember when I first started in Monterey, one woman that I interviewed said, "Why are you talking to me? I'm just a housewife." And I said, "No, you are not. You are an actor in history just like we all are. You're an actor. And your role is as important as anybody's role." And that's how I feel about places like Salinas that are not overlooked in their own worlds, but they are often overlooked by scholars, by academics who talk about cities as though these smaller cities don't exist.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Carol Lynn McKibben. It's the Salinas, what's the project again?
The Salinas History Project.
The Salinas History Project.
And Agropolis will be the title of the new book.
I'm Mark Baer. You're watching YourTown television program. Stay tuned.